Hello, hello, hello. On? Alright, there we go. It's on. Welcome. My name is Cas CommunistVriska, probably better known as CommunistVriska. And this is a live stream where I'm going to answer some of my long backlogs of questions about Andrew Hussey's Homestuck and its Classpecting system. Yeah, so here we go. Well, first I'd like to respond to an anonymous querent in my Ask box who says, I find you very talented, hot, and intelligent, but something prevents me from talking to you. Why, thank you, anonymous person. That's very kind of you. Now, to get down to business, the Sylph of Breath. The Sylph of Breath is a moderately passive creation class, or more broadly an engineer class. They're often referred to as a healer class, although this is disputed. And of course, to quote one of the more definitive statements about sylphs from the text, they are like a witch, but more magical. There are all kinds of ways to interpret that, and I mentioned that briefly in our last live stream. But yeah, so the Sylph of Breath is actually one that's been requested at least twice, and I think it's a very interesting one and one I've struggled to interpret, honestly, because of my sort of lack of familiarity with breath as an aspect. But I'm going to give it my best shot. The Sylph of Breath is one who facilitates the development of liberation and agency in others. If we look to some of the symbols of breath in the text, we see it's very mercurial. It's about travel, communication, particularly via mail and the postal service. And it's also about the power to control one's own destiny. I mentioned in the last stream a connection between breath and like side quests in video games. It's all about branching and diffusion, just like its opposite or complement blood is about those things which tie us together, connections, bonds, hierarchies, right? Breath is about the opposite of that. It's about breaking free, distancing oneself, for better or for worse. I'm so sorry, the camera is shaky. I'm going to try to fix that. But yes, so the Sylph, just like the Mage, generates their aspect for their own benefit. The Sylph generates their aspect for the benefit of others, and also, just like its complement, the Prince, the Sylph is a class which is focused on refining, enhancing, ameliorating, which can mean healing, yes, but which really means improvement. Specialization. So, how do these things go together? Well, I think the Sylph of Breath is likely to be someone who wants others to break out of their mold. And that seems like a really facile, simplistic thing to say, but what I mean is that they're always the person who's encouraging those around them to set themselves free, to be less restricted. And one thing with sylphs, and this applies to princes too, opposed classes have a whole lot in common. And I think that's something that's often understated in discussions of classpecting. But yeah, the sylph is an advisor class, and one of their challenges is A, to learn when their advice is and isn't needed, and B, to take their own advice. This is crucial. So the Sylph of Breath is actually quite possibly someone who is more repressed than they let on, someone who encourages others to set themselves free, but is maybe not quite free of their own baggage, and that is sort of going to be their hero's journey. The Sylph of Breath, I think, would make a great protagonist. And of course, our main protagonist and our first point of view character in Andrew Hussey's Homestuck is John Egbert, who's an heir of breath, another passive breath player. This is no accident. Breath is I would say along with its opposite, blood, and also with time and light. It's a very proactive aspect. Breath and blood are both proactive in different ways. But when you combine a proactive aspect with a passive class, you get a great setup for growth and personal development. And this is not to say, all the class specs are about personal development because because Spurbs grew up, whatever. It is a coming of age story. That's the point there. It's a Bildungsroman by way of creation myth. And so the Sylph of Breath might start out as someone who is quite anchored, but aspires to more, and particularly aspires to awaken something in others that they might be lacking. It's someone who's always looking out at the horizon, always looking off into the distance and saying, hey, wouldn't you like to go there? Oh, hello. Welcome aboard. We're talking about the Sylph of Breath. And so, yeah, the Sylph of Breath is looking out at the horizon and, hey, Ja, and wanting to go on a journey. I'm almost reminded of the binary sunset scene in the original Star Wars. You know the scene I'm talking about. And yeah, so the problem here is that to get into maybe some of the difficulties and challenges that a Sylph of Breath might face over the course of their playing the game is that they're going to have to contend with the fact that their encouragement of exploration, the encouragement of pushing one's limits, of constantly being all like, bring me that horizon, is that it can be a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? A force that drives people apart. It's not this sort of rugged individualist spirit, which is a gift and a curse to all Breath players, can be especially risky when you're kind of pushing others towards that individualist mindset when you haven't fully adopted it yourself. Disorienting? Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it. Especially given Breath's connotations of travel and maps. Sort of lateral connection one might make there is to orienteering, to understanding one's physical place in the world. Because Breath is about travel and about journeys. Yeah, the the Sylph of Breath is going to have to be careful that they don't lose their friends in a literal sense. The Sylph of Breath wants people to try new things, and that can be great, but it can also be a force that really really disorients people and can, without the grounding influence of perhaps an active Blood player or an active Doom player, to ground them, can be dangerous to a session. To get into like the kind of powers they might have, all Breath players can fly, sometimes before God tier. Also, a Sylph of Breath is always going to know where they are. I see a Sylph of Breath as someone who has an absolutely excellent sense of direction. Just like a Sylph of Space is great at things like fine artistic design or fine engineering, a Sylph of Breath is going to be great at plotting out really accurate routes, navigating between Scylla and Charybdis, so to speak. And as they ascend through the echelon ladder, this is going to become almost a preternatural ability to navigate a course. So I hope that was a decent explanation of the Sylph of Breath. I don't have as much affinity for breath as an aspect as I do with many other aspects, but that's what I've got for you there. Next up, we have someone inquiring as to the similarities and the differences between the Seer of Void and the Knight of Void. Yes, Anonymous Querent says, "Hello, a few days ago I got Seer of Void on your test, and I wanted to see what the similarities and differences were compared to a Knight of Void. If you aren't busy, of course." Well, you asked that months ago, and I'm so sorry, I'm afraid I was busy at the time, but I'm not now, and so I will answer your question now. The Seer of Void versus the Knight of Void. So yeah, the Seer is a knowledge class, is a passive class, is a counselor class. The Seer is a prophet, a counselor in the most literal sense. The one who sees nothing versus the one who wields nothing. Exactly. I actually did. I don't think I've ever fully analyzed the Seer of Void. I did do a full analysis of a Knight of Void a while back, and I might read from that in a moment. But yeah. So here the aspect is the same. It's void. It's the power of nothingness, of oblivion, of the unknown, and of the subconscious. Amnesia. Oh, actually, to quote a song I was listening to earlier, because I do love my lyric quotes. John McClane by Say Anything. Quote, "Amnesia is a revelation." There's a Seer of Void line for you right there. And to compare the Seer and Knight classes, we want to look at what their roles in a session are and what the path of personal growth they need to follow is, what the game is trying to teach them before they become the gods of a new world. And so for a Seer, Seers and witches share this issue of bargaining, this contention between the desire to help others and the desire to effect positive change, and the risks of hubris, the risks of the Faustian bargain. And especially due to Void's association with the horror terrors and the furthest ring, this is going to be a real challenge for our Seer of Void, is to not lose themselves in their pursuit of forbidden knowledge. And you might think, well, that sounds an awful lot like the Seer of Light. And you'd be darn right. Because same class, opposite aspects often means there are going to be a lot of similarities because of the complementarity between opposed aspects. Seers know a lot and have a great desire for curiosity. Mixed up my words there. A great curiosity and desire for knowledge. And so this, and Void is about the absence of knowledge. It's about the absence of data, or lack of understanding, or loss of memory. You get the idea. So a Seer Void is going to be contending with this paradox or dialectic between curiosity about oblivion. They want to see what's going on beneath the darkness of the mind. Maybe someone who's interested in psychoanalysis or the interpretation of dreams, particularly of nightmares. I'm almost thinking with the Seer of Void, something like a Lovecraft protagonist, like a Randolph Carter type character, who's constantly gazing into the darkness and wondering, what's out there? Do I want to know? And so the Seers challenge their course of development to see what is hidden. Yes, exactly. Is their course of development is to, of all Seers, is to move from the learner to the teacher, from the querent to the prophet. First they acquire their knowledge and then they share their knowledge, and we see this arc demonstrated beautifully with our Seer of Blood, Cancrevantas, or the Signless, or the Sufferer, whichever iteration of him we're talking about. And also, of course, with Rose Lalonde, who's the first Seer we meet, there's this desire to both to learn and to teach, and the challenge here is not to lose yourself in the process, not to sacrifice yourself to this vast sea of information and thought that you're wandering into. And with a Seer Void, this is an especially salient risk, because Void is risky business. You know, balancing on that fine line between knowledge and oblivion is a tricky act. And before I get too carried away with the Seer of Void, I will go back to the class spec we're comparing it to, which is the Knight of Void. And the Knight of Void is one I've written a full analysis on. This is someone who, the Knight is about performance. They're a steward class, like the Rogue. They're an active class and a catalyst class, specifically, like the Maid and the Mage. The Knight, yeah, Bell Swamp Connection rules. I would say it's actually the standout track on that album, but also the whole thing is great. And the Knight of Void wields nothing, but their job is also to defend and to protect nothing. They're stewards. They hold down the fort. And so with the Knight of Void, we have someone who's both grounded and adrift at the same time. Someone who is who knows very little about themselves, and more importantly, doesn't want to know much more about themselves. And so already here we can establish a big difference between the Knight Void and the Seer of Void. The Seer of Void, like any Seer, is very, very curious, and particularly about the depths of their own consciousness. The Knight of Void is not. In fact, they probably have an intense aversion to self-examination and self-reflection. They have no interest in their subconscious and are indeed probably frightened of it, and so they are going to project a level of stoicism. Like I said, the Knight of Doom is very stoic, but with the Knight of Void, it's going to be more than stoicism, bluntness, direct, not even directness, but a sort of a shallowness at first is going to be their knightly shield. They have a lot going on deep inside them, buried deep down, and they don't want the world to know that. They want to keep that buried. And so their challenge is going to be to express themselves more fully, but more than that, to realize the depth of their own character and the depth of other people's characters. A Knight of Void at first will think of things in very simplistic and direct terms, and they'll see this probably as a way of being straight to the point, right? Not fucking around, so to speak. Yes. As you say, they'll try to look like they just mentally checked out, right? You could almost be reminded of, like the sort of person who's really brilliant but kind of hates that about themselves, and so they play dumb all the time and no one really quite buys it. I've known a couple of people like that. And yeah, they're someone who really wants to seem checked out, disinterested. And so really I think this is a great example of how two classes in the same aspect can be wildly different. We have a sort of almost a mad scientist gazing too long into the void, literally, type with the Seer of Void, and then we have someone who wants nothing to do with all of that in the Knight of Void. But in terms of similarities, they're both Void players. So in terms of symbolism, there are going to be a lot of symbolic themes in common. Darkness, the horror terrors, eldritch knowledge. The Knight of Void is probably constantly going to come across like they're hiding something. They're not going to talk much. They're not going to express much emotion. Whereas the Seer will probably be pretty expressive, but they'll be vague about it. So they have that commonality there, and that neither of them, at least at first, are going to want to authentically share a lot. They're going to want to conceal the full depth of themselves and their knowledge. Yes, one is confronted with the abyss staring back at them, and the other one is just trying really, really hard to be like, no thoughts, head empty. It's a great way to put it, Zhao. So I think we'll end that comparison on that note. Next up, we have a comparison between the Page of Heart and the Seer of Life. So, in this case, both the class and the aspect are different. So I'm going to start with the comparison element of this compare and contrast, because I think there will be less of that, so I want to get that out of the way right off the turnbuckle. The Page of Heart is one who needs to realize that they have an identity. They're someone who's going to spend a lot of their life early on defining themselves through other people, defining themselves through things that they truly aren't. They're going to feel like they can never be their own individual because they are hopelessly dependent on others, whether that's friends, romantic partners, family, the world around them. But they really aspire to express more than they feel capable of expressing. The Seer of Life, Life. The Seer of Life is someone who means to acquire a deeper understanding of biological and social structures. Seer of Life. This is random, and I'll probably correct myself later. But the first name that came to mind is Friedrich Engels. A little bit of niche CommunistVriska there. Anyways, yeah, the Seer of Life is analytical, like any seer, but their particular realm of interest is going to be A, societies and social structures, and B, biology, and particularly the biology of plants and animals, of life cycles. And what these two things have in common is that they are both cycles of production, multiplication, and consumption. This is what life has in common with its complementary aspect of Doom, is that they're both about these cycles of consumption, decay, restoration, reproduction. So what do they have in common? Well, they're both passive classes. And there's got to be something else. I'll come up with something. Well, they are both passive classes with quite proactive aspects. To go back to something I said about the Sylph of Breath, life is very exuberant, and we see this connection to trickster mode, or with the fairies' sort of bubbly persona, or Mina's over-the-top performative charisma. And Heart can be the same way. I mean, Nepeta and Dirk are very different characters, but they are both Heart players, and if they have a very strong sense of who they are. And with Dirk, of course, because he's a prince, there's a process of moving into that. With the Page of Heart, it's going to be the same way. But really, what these two are going to have in common is that they aren't dark and tortured souls. That's for sure. These are people who are going to at least try to be happy and optimistic a lot of the time, even if, as in the case of the Page of Heart, they might be faking it a little bit. But you know, the maxim of the page is "fake it till you make it." I'm stealing that from a post I wrote a while ago. But yeah. So, what are the differences here? Well, I'll talk about each one individually first. The page has one of the clearest character arcs of any particular class in the game. They are someone who, yeah, no matter what direction they go, by the end, a heart player will be going hard. Yeah. Heart players, like light players and time players, all that sort of far right corner of the aspect wheel is they tend to get dramatic, especially as they come into their own. A Page of Heart is going to be someone who's really subdued, lets people talk over them, defines themselves through what other people think of them, really has trouble instantiating their identity, making themselves real and making themselves known. And they're going to have these heroes, these people they admire in their life. Again, maybe a friend, a family member, a romantic interest, who they idolize because they perceive in that person a greater level of freedom of self-expression, and more than that, a greater level of solidity of identity than they believe themselves to have. And their challenge is going to be to realize that they have that in themselves too, that they are just as much of a real person, that they have just as much to express as this person they admire so much. Now, with the Seer of Life, we were just talking about a Seer with the Seer of Void, and a Seer of Life. Oh, hello. A Seer of Life is someone who wants to understand the intricacies of social networks and of life cycles, production, consumption. Like I said, another thing I always think of when I think of the Seer of Life, besides Friedrich Engels, is a medical doctor, particularly a medical specialist. Someone who really wants to understand how, or maybe a zoologist, someone who wants to understand how the inner workings of living things go. I mean, just to break it down in the most simple way, Seer of Life: understand, see, perceive, behold life. And in the literal sense, life is living things, plants, animals, biology, anatomy. And so the Seer of Life is not going to have the problem the Page of Heart has with expressing themselves. Seers love to talk. They have a lot to express, and they are absolutely willing to express it. Their challenge is to not is almost the reverse of the Page of Hearts. Their challenge is not to lose themselves to their work, not just to become another cell in the organism, so to speak, but to not become so lost in learning that they, or study, that they end up a mere vessel for that which they intend to interpret. So a similarity we could draw here is that it's a struggle not to lose one's individuality. In the case of the Page, they've already lost it. In the case of the Seer, they have a lot of it, but are at risk of becoming another cog in the machine. Someone who is really solely dedicated to gaming the system and being part of the system. They're the kind of person who might be rebellious at first, but run the risk of losing all of their character, sense of individuality, and ultimately becoming passive. the last thing the Seer of Life wants to do is become passive, because they are meant to be a prophet. They are meant to convey knowledge of a new order. And yeah, the challenge is not to surrender to the old regime, not to allow themselves to be consumed by the process of consumption. There we go. Compared and contrasted. I hope it doesn't seem like I'm rushing here. I'm trying to give at least 10 minutes to each question, like I did last time. But also I have a great many of these to go through, so we'll see how it goes, right? Next up, we have a comparison and another compare and contrast question: the Mage of Time and the Mage of Mind. Okay, here's a cool one, because same class, very different aspects. So first, mages. We don't know a lot about mages, and I gave this disclaimer in my Mage of Blood discussion in the last stream, and I'm going to say it again here. Almost everything I or any other Classpector says about mages is going to be speculation, in large part, because we were just never told that much about mages. And what do we have to work with? Solix and Mulin. There's just not a lot of content there. We get a few strong monologues from Solix, but yeah, it's something we know very little about. Now, all that said, the way I interpret the mage is as someone who fully experiences their aspect, who fully immerses themselves in it, and in so doing is able to provoke it and incite it to emerge into the world, because their knowledge of it is more intimate than anyone else's knowledge of it, if that makes any sense. The mage is like the maid and knight, a catalyst, so they are going to be someone who wields and exploits their aspect. People say knights are the exploitation class. I would extend that actually to both the other catalyst classes, maid and the mage. So someone who uses their aspect like a mage uses magic, because they're a mage. There's really not a lot to work with about mages. I'm doing my best. All right, so we're comparing the Mage of Time to the Mage of Mind. Well, I do know a Mage of Time. Yes, we know how to press our aspects buttons. That's a great way to put it. That's a quality mages share with maids, and we can see that commonality with, for example, Solix and Oradia. That's a reason they work together so well. They have a trine in both class and aspect. It's great. Yeah, I know a Mage of Time. For personal reasons, I will be saying absolutely nothing more on the matter. Mage of Mind. This is the active analog to Terezi Pyrope's class. I will talk about the Mage of Time, don't worry. It's actually the very first Classpect I analyzed on CommunistVriska when I was starting this blog back in May of 2020. Which feels like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But I'm losing the plot. Anyways, Mage of Time and Mage of Mind. One who understands and knows how to press the buttons of time, which not only refers to literal time, such as time travel, which is a common theme of all time players, is the ability to traverse the timelines within the game, and the Mage of Mind, which is mind is because it's not a cardinal aspect, is both a bit more nuanced and a bit more vague. Mind has to do with justice and ethics. Just like one might say heart is about empathy and emotional morality, mind is about justice, and legal morality. I mean legal not so much in the literal sense of laws, although we do see that with Terezi, but legal in the sense of regular, computational, rational. Time is about rhythms, endings, climax, and so one commonality we have here between the two aspects is structure. Time, doom, mind, and light all contend with structure and computation to various extents. Doom and mind more so, time and light in a slightly less organized way. Heart and mind are both about choice. Yeah, they're both about choice. They're both about ethics and morality. They're both about turning points in individual lives. And so with time and mind, the main difference here is that the Mage of Mind is going to be working on a much more social and personal level. The Mage of Time is someone who is going to have a natural impulse to go off again on their own, so to speak. The Mage of Time is... all time players are like this to some extent, again, but the Mage of Time, especially since they're an active class, is going to be a bit of a loner, and this probably isn't going to be the best thing for them, because time players do need support. They do need other people in their lives, and they often, as we see with Dave, especially in the later acts of Homestuck, they aren't as self-reliant as they suppose themselves to be. But with Mind, it's going to be much more about personal responsibility. It's going to be much more about... I could see a Mage of Mind being like a legislator, someone who makes the laws, not a lawyer who interprets and negotiates with the law, but as the one who literally writes them, who understands them intimately, not because they've studied them, but because they are immersed in the law. Which could be both a very powerful thing and a very dangerous thing, because legal power corrupts. I don't think I need to say anything more about that. So we have a comparison sort of between, I don't want to say idealistic, because Mind players are not romantic idealists in the same way as Hope and Heart players are, but idealist in the sense of humanitarian, really wants to change the world. Liberal is maybe too specific, because they're honestly just as likely to be a communist or a conservative or whatever else, but they have a strong belief that things need to be reformed, that's for sure. Maybe a judge? Yeah, a judge or a legislator could work. That's another good comparison to draw with the Seer of Mind as a lawyer. Mage of Mind might be more along the lines of a judge or a legislator. And so, just like the Mage of Time is going to have to struggle with their isolation from society, the Mage of Time is going to have to struggle with that. The Mage of Mind is going to have to struggle with the influence, the excessive influence society has on them. As someone who has a lot of power to influence society and influence others through their powerful, persuasive arguments, their command of language, their command of dialogue and reason, they're going to have to be careful not to let their desire to use power for good and their desire to be rational and logical overtake their capacity for care. And when I say care, I mean both empathy for others and self-preservation. Another theme I touched on in the last stream when it comes to the Mage of Blood is that mages do tend to suffer a great deal. With the Mage of Mind, this could be someone who becomes cold, who becomes callous, who has seen so much wrong that they start to lose the will to do right. And with the Mage of Time, this is someone who struggles so much, because time is the aspect of struggle, struggles so much, fights so hard, wants to get so much right that they destroy themselves in the process. Yeah, I hope that's a decent comparison. They're actually quite similar, despite the many differences between mind and time. Time is much more emotionally focused. It has to do with music, it has to do with fights, it has to do with contests. Mind is much more about reason, law, systematicness. They do have quite a bit in common. Yeah. So next up, we have, get this, another mage. I wonder if that's because it's such a common result on it's like the third most common class result on my class quiz. I don't know. I've gotten a lot of requests about mages, and this one is about the Mage of Life. So, when I mentioned earlier, when I was talking earlier about the Seer of Life, I was talking about it both in relation to social systems and to physical biology, because those are the two major domains of life. And yeah, with a mage, I've already covered a lot of this ground earlier. It's someone who knows how to push the buttons. It's someone who is intimately familiar with an aspect due to a lifelong immersion in it. They're the one who fully experiences their aspect. And their challenge is not to be destroyed by it, not to be eclipsed by it, but rather to wield it to the benefit of everyone around them, by using their particular special knowledge of it. And so I would see the Mage of Life as someone who is, well, someone who's been screwed over by the system and therefore knows a lot about it. When I say the system, I mean like the political and economic establishment. And also, possibly, this is a bit dark, but by their own bodies. This is someone who's probably going to be in poor health, quite unhappy, and not well served by the system. But because of this, they're very worldly, because they've had so many experiences and so many bad experiences. They know how things work. They're very resilient. It's going to be very, very difficult to keep a Mage of Life down, because they have struggled a whole bloody lot, and they're not going to let this stop them, right? So, Mage is an active class. How do we take this person who has essentially been victimized constantly? How does the agency and active player part come into this? Well, the Mage of Life is going to be resolutely determined to change things, to change the system that they've been immersed in. Not so much, not necessarily, but possibly. Yeah, they have a lot of life experience, exactly. And they want to make things better, and probably largely in a self-interested way. Like, this isn't the Seer of Life or the Sylph of Life who really wants to heal and fix things and reform and improve. This is someone who has been screwed over so many times that they want to break free. Life is also about youth and exuberance. So this is maybe someone who, not someone who didn't have it, because that would be more leaning toward page, prince, thief, bard area, but someone who feels like when they were younger, they never accomplished much, or they never had experiences that helped them. They had more experiences that were hurtful, And there's going to be an intense desire for redemption, I think. Not moral redemption as in like salvation from sin, but redemption as in like vindication, as in success is the best revenge, that kind of redemption. And their challenge is going to be to achieve that success without becoming a force for destruction. The other challenge for mages, one is self-destruction. The other one is lashing out, is destroying those around them using their knowledge. Yeah, the phrase "success is the best revenge" works really well here. They want to fix things, and specifically they want to fix things for themselves. They want to make the world around them a better place, and they know how to do it. The challenge is that, for one thing, their circumstances are going to keep getting them down, whether that's physical health or an oppressive establishment, a tyrant or a corrupt government, perhaps, or they might be surrounded by wealth and excess, but not have access to it themselves, and they might have some sort of quest involving seizing power, involving acquiring resources, and then being confronted with the moral challenge of well, they're sure they know best what to do with this. And that could be great. But you also don't want someone who's, how do I put this? This is someone who has experienced a lot, and just like with the Mage of Mind, if their suffering hardens them, a puppet king, that's another great interpretation of this. Yeah. Or queen, yes. A puppet monarch. Yeah, that's just as great an example as someone who's been victimized by the system, is someone who has power within a system, but the power doesn't actually do them any good, or those around them any good. Someone who both benefits and is victimized by a social or economic structure. Yeah, I love that idea, because one thing I've said about mages often is that they get both the best and the worst of their aspect. They both suffer from it and are able to take the greatest advantage of it, because, again, they experience it in all its variety. And their challenge is going to be, yeah, to be authentic. I was talking about the Seer of Life earlier, who faces a similar challenge, not just to become another cell in the organism or another cog in the machine, but to be a truly living, independent creature with an independent life. Life is adjacent to breath. So again, independence is an important question at hand here. As for their actual powers or talents within the game, I like the idea of a Mage of Life using like life magic, being able to both heal and harm through their ability to manipulate biology, both cure and inflict disease or poison, that sort of thing. Yeah. All right. What's up next? Oh, I've been looking forward to this one. So this is about a conversation I had with an anon on CommunistVriska.tumblr.edu quite a long while ago, way back in summer of 2020. You may say, well, that's not that long ago. It feels like a lifetime. So let's see. This is a discussion of the concepts of logos, ethos, and pathos as they pertain to the aspect trine of light, blood, and mind. And this is a less specific analysis and more an extended discussion. So yeah. Let's see. I'm so sorry. I should have had this pulled up already. All right, thinking about the logos, ethos, pathos split, here's my take. Logos, mind, space, void, doom, pathos, light, heart, rage, time, ethos, blood, hope, life, breath. Huh. And then they say breath and time could be switched. I haven't thought about this in forever, and I remember I wanted to answer this right away, but I probably got carried away with something else. I do have a tendency to do that. So yeah, I believe the original concept we were discussing was logos as mind, pathos as light, and ethos as blood. I actually kind of disagree with that assessment. I would say blood is pathos with some element of ethos, mind is primarily ethos with some element of logos, and light is all logos. Light players actually often struggle with pathos and ethos, as we see with my all-time favorite character, Vriska Circuit, someone who is really quite intelligent and quite emotionally expressive and at times emotionally manipulative, but has some minor ethical concerns they might want to think through. Someone who maybe does not have the strongest sense of ethics at first. Not to be too critical of Vriska on CommunistVriska.tumblr.edu, but yeah. I do like the way that these can be applied to the trines. I'm not sure I entirely agree with this anon. The space void doom thing for logos though is excellent. Space void and doom. What do those three have in common? It's a string. They're all right next to each other, and mind was also placed in that category. Although, as I said, mind does have an ethical component to it. But yeah, those are all all 3/4 of those aspects have a real connection to technical skill, the physical sciences, physical engineering, structures, systems, rules, both void and doom, and on occasion mind have a connection to languages, particularly computer languages, computational systems, and rational thought. Light, I'm actually going to redact my statement about light being logos, because light is not rational. Light is knowledge-oriented and learning-oriented, but light is not about reason in the same way, for example, mind and doom are. Does that make sense? I know I've been rambling at probably even more of a rapid and chaotic pace than I did in my last stream. But yeah. I might come back to that later, but I do want to get to some actual some more Classpect analysis, and this next one is a cool one. So the next topic on the docket is the Witch of Blood, which is an absolute badass Classpect title. Like, wow, Witch of Blood. So the Witch of Blood is one of those classes that, it's kind of like Prince of Doom, Thief of Heart. It's one of those classes that's like, oh, so this is going to be the antagonist of the story. Not to be too judgmental of any witches of blood out there. These are a witch is someone who breaks or bends the rules, manipulates, transforms, or radically alters. And blood is the aspect of bonds, social structures, promises, and obligations. So while it sounds a little harsh, one could in the most literal sense string that together and be like, someone who manipulates relationships and breaks promises. But that sounds terrible. So let's focus on some of the positive qualities of a witch of blood, which is that blood is about bonds, and witch is a class focused on liberation. So the witch of blood is going to be someone who can wield the thing ultimately over the course of their development as a person and as a character, can take control of the things that have held them down, tied them together, and take those toxic relationships, those oppressive structures, those coercive contracts, and ultimately bend them and take control of them themselves. My first thought, and again, this isn't a hard and fast classpecting of the character, but my first thought was Rowena from Supernatural, if you're familiar with that character, because that's someone who is absolutely held down by a lot of toxic connections, a lot of obligations to societies and individuals, that she ultimately breaks free of and takes advantage of, and spoiler alert, in the final season becomes Queen of Hell. Actually, yeah, I am going to do this. Rowena, Witch of Blood. And I mean, she's also a literal witch, so that tracks. A Witch of Blood could probably officiate a marriage. Yeah, although I do think that's true of like basically any blood player besides a prince or a bard or a thief. A prince of blood would be great at inflicting divorce upon those who need it. Shouldn't say that. But yeah, Rowena is a great example of a witch of blood. And if we think about, and she ultimately gets a redemption arc, right? She's ultimately a good guy. A divorce attorney, yeah. So positive qualities of a witch of blood are that this is someone who is going to ultimately not just break themselves free of oppression, but change oppressive structures for the better through their presence and through their skill. This is someone who could navigate a corrupt system and ultimately take control of it and over time make it less corrupt. Or they could just take over it and keep being corrupt. Because breaking the rules doesn't necessarily mean doing good, right? The Witch of Blood is probably chaotic aligned, but could go good, evil, or neutral. Not that Classpect is inherently linked to D&D style alignment structures, because really they could be of any alignment, but there is a calling towards chaos because manipulating relationships, breaking promises, taking advantage of systems that have been repressive in the past, all lends itself towards chaos, towards anti-legalism. So, yeah. As for their actual powers, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is bloodbending, is being able to control other people's movements by manipulating their blood. But also, I think it would be neat to see a Witch of Mind with some degree of psychic potential, who could like see the rules and promises others have made and figure out how to take advantage of that. Again, there's a lot of potential for wrongdoing there, but when someone is a blood player, I mean, if you look at the two blood players we know in canon, they both have really oppressive systems to contend with. And I think that's likely to be true of any blood player. Because sometimes promises, contracts, and obligations can be used to do harm, and that's when blood players are needed to make sure that these relationships and these structures are healthy and beneficial. Transferring promises, concentrating bonds. Yeah, that's another great way to characterize it, is making sure that promises and obligations, the forces that bind people together and tether people together, are bringing people together to make them stronger, not bringing people together to keep them down. There we go. So next up, we have the Seer of Mind, our first canonical Classpect of the evening. This is Terezi's Classpect. I love Terezi. Yeah, so the Seer of Mind, we of course have Terezi as a legislator, or sort of lawyer. Archetype. Mind is about ethics, is about reason, is about law, and when I say law, I don't necessarily just mean literal law. As I said in the Seer of Mind discussion, or sorry, the Mage of Mind discussion, really I mean pragmatics, right? Like the language of normative ethics. So yeah, what are the ways we could interpret a Seer of Mind more broadly without focusing too much on the character that appears in canon? Actions and consequences. It's a great place to start. Yeah. Actions and consequences is often used as the root of the mind aspect in a lot of discussions of it, and I really do agree with that, because mind is about ethics, yes, but particularly about consequentialist and even utilitarian ethics. And so, if we want to talk about like three major ethical schools, we could see mind as being about consequentialism and utilitarianism, blood as about deontology and duty ethics, and light as about virtue ethics. Oh, I love that. There's a trine right there. Yes. Friedrich Engels was a life player, but Immanuel Kant was a blood player. You heard it here first. Anyways, Seer of Mind is someone who looks ahead and sees how things are going to turn out, and ideally uses that knowledge to navigate the right way, navigate the one safe way through the minefield of human error and human deviation and human choice. And so the challenge here, and one of the challenges Terezi faces, is again not only acquiring that knowledge, but passing it on. In one of my favorite sequences in all of Andrew Hussey's Homestuck, is when Terezi and John, a mind player and a breath player, collaborate to retcon most of the entire alpha timeline. It's beautiful. Because a seer is ultimately meant not only to be a student and learner, but a prophet and a teacher. They know and want to know about actions and consequences, and about ethics, and about particularly the ethics of choice. But ultimately what they're tasked with is to pass this knowledge on and to ensure that others make the right choices. It's an easy thing for them to see their own right choices, but what they need to do is persuade other people of their cause, of why they're so concerned with this particular set of actions and consequences, right? There's very interesting potential for dialogue, I think, with Seer of Mind or with any mind player, because mind does have a lot to do with dialogue. But light players tend to be very talkative. Mind players can be too, especially a Seer of Mind, because of the whole knowledge class thing. But mind players tend to be more pointed than light players. Light players will ramble, mind players will get straight to the heart of it, so to speak. And well, the complementary aspect here is heart, right? So, yeah, the mind player is the Seer of Mind is going to be pretty judgmental. Not as much as the Sylph of Mind would be, you gods, can you imagine? But still, they are going to look at some of the choices people make, perhaps the choices, say, the Witch of Blood, the Mage of Time, or even the fellow Seer, the Seer of Void, just to mention a few that we've talked about earlier. They might look at some of their allies who make questionable choices and be really concerned with stopping that, because you can only make too many dubious choices in the game, capital G game, before things really go off the rails. And one of the tasks a Seer of Mind has within the game, within this coming of age story / creation myth / RPG, is really to get things back on the rails, because they see all the sort of height of the Seer of Mind's power we see in the video panel in Homestuck, Terezi, remember. Seeing all the paths that branch out again, the endless string of choices and actions by various agents that led things to this point, and being able to find that one safe way through the chaotic morass of human emotion, human chaos, and really getting things back in line, getting things back in order. And this is a very important task, which is why a Seer of Mind who becomes misguided or who is being manipulated by an outside party can be so very dangerous. I mean, it's Terezi along with Egbert, who ultimately affects the retcon and saves the alpha timeline, but it's also her self-righteousness, her desire for punitive revenge, that causes her to momentarily neglect the consequences of an action when she kills Vriska prior to the retcon, which is what necessitates the retcon in the first place. Again, Seers, something that all Seers will have to contend with is, well, when you're a prophet, the second most important thing is getting people to believe you. The first most important thing is being right. There's my analysis of the Seer of Mind. Hope you liked it. And so next up we have two rogues. First the Rogue of Hope, and then another rogue, and another canon class spec, the Rogue of Heart, Nepeta Leon. So the Rogue of Hope. Well, I'll start with this one, because it's this my aspect, but my opposite class. And also, incidentally, the Classpect I originally assigned to Castiel from Supernatural, not to go off on another Supernatural tangent, I promise. But, yeah. The Rogue of Hope, someone who, speaking of prophecy, someone who sets hope and belief and confidence right. The Rogue, like their complement or opposite, the Knight, is a steward. They hold down the fort, they set things into their right place. And whereas the Knight does this in an active sense, in the sense of wielding, taking up arms, defending, protecting, the Rogue does this in the passive sense of redistributing, of channeling to the right place. The Knight is the catalyst, whereas the Rogue is the carrier. Yes. So another thing rogues have, along with pages and along with heirs, more than an heir, but not quite so much as a page, I guess one might say, is a lack of confidence, particularly a lack of confidence as it pertains to their aspect. A Rogue of Hope might at first see themselves as someone faithless, as someone who struggles to really believe in anything, or as someone who has beliefs and professes beliefs, but underneath that profession of the belief does not hold in their hearts any strong conviction, which is, that's an important distinction. It's one thing to believe something, to believe a principle, and to say that. It's another to believe something strongly and to fight for it. And that's what the rogue needs to do, is they need to challenge. So a Rogue of Hope has doubts and beliefs, and both of these are usually going to be pretty weak. Their struggle is going to be to turn the doubts into challenges of wrong belief, and turn their beliefs into true convictions, to true faith. Because both their doubt and their faith are going to be mediated by a level of detachment, and it's this detachment that they need to work past if they are to truly tap into the power and potential that the aspect of hope contains. And so what does this mean in practice, right? Well, in the game, hope isn't just connected to faith and belief, but it is also connected to radiant white light. It's connected to both magic and science, because and science, right? Because of the power of belief to affect reality. Both hope players and rage players arguably affect reality on the deepest level. Space and time players affect reality on the most direct level, but rage and hope players affect reality on the most fundamental level, because rage and hope are the two metatextual aspects, or the two meta aspects. Both of these aspects reach beyond the fourth wall, so to speak, because hope is about the suspension of disbelief, and rage is about the literal shattering of the fourth wall. Zhao says, they learn both to believe and disbelieve hard, and help others correct their excess or lack of belief. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a great, straight to the point way to put it. Yeah, so Right. The Rogue of Hope is at first going to have no serious commitments, no serious convictions, and they need to really assert themselves, really be able to say this is true and this is false, really figure out where those lines are drawn now and where they must be drawn, because a rogue's ultimate duty is to set things in the right place, to channel things from where they oughtn't to be to where they ought to be. And a Rogue of Hope, ultimately on a meta level, is someone who makes the story more believable, who forces the reader to suspend their disbelief, who might not make a whole lot of sense. And this is why Hope players need Light players and Doom players and such to keep them grounded, to keep them from entering a level of chaoticness or delusion, or you know, it's the double-edged sword of belief. So it's a very fine line between faith and delusion, fine line between happiness and intoxication, fine line between trust and naivete. And that's the line that the Rogue of Hope is challenged and called upon to walk. Sorry, spaced out for a moment there. I didn't quite spend 10 minutes covering that, but because the next one is a rogue, also I'm going to connect back to it a little bit. The Rogue of Heart. So we have one in canon, right? We have Nepataleon, who is really just so sweet. I love her. She deserved better. Nepataleon is someone who cares deeply about relationships and about identity. She's got one of the most strongly defined identities of any of the beta trolls, and at least in my opinion, based on my reading. And but she struggles to turn that identity into action, and to really, she's well capable of being herself, but she struggles with asserting for herself and being self-motivated. I mentioned the Page of Heart earlier, tends to define themselves through others. The Rogue of Heart knows who they are and knows who they want to be, but they still lean on others because somewhere in there they don't think who they are is good enough. They know who they are and who they want to be, but they don't think who they are is up to becoming who they want to be, you know? And so one thing that Hope and Heart have in common is that they're both kind of morally oriented. Like I said earlier, Heart is more to do with empathetic or emotional morality, whereas Hope has a lot more to do with faith and dogma. And so there is a very real difference there. But yeah, the challenge a Rogue of Heart faces is to not only be themselves, but to make themselves more. They have their own corner in which they have defined themselves. They need to come out of it and bring themselves to the world, such that those around them are able to find their identities, find these empathetic connections that the Rogue of Heart can see, but doesn't quite have the confidence to pull together. We see Nepeta has all of these charts, right? All of these relationships, and she really understands those around her, but she doesn't have the confidence to to say a whole lot of it aloud. And ultimately, a fully realized rogue of heart would be someone who gets all the heartbeats around them beating in time, so to speak, sets up a compelling rhythm, really draws these hearts together. There's a reason heart and blood players go so well together, and I mean that both in the sense of romantic pairings in the story itself, and the symbolism of hearts and blood, and also they're at a sextile on the aspect wheel. It's a strong connection there, and they also both have to do with relationships, with friendship, with love, and those sorts of social bonds, those sort of voluntary, emotional social bonds. And so, yeah, I think that's an important element of the Rogue of Hearts character, is really not just looking into everyone's hearts, but drawing the hearts closer together, helping people not only empathize with one another, but use that empathy to find common cause, use that empathy to collaborate and allow each person to fully realize themselves and their relationships. Nepeta and Karkat will always be really sweet together, although I am a John Cat shipper at heart. So, because we have two rogues next to each other on the chart, this wasn't really the question, but to talk about some of the similarities between them, I think that it's interesting that actually a Rogue of Heart and a Rogue of Hope have the same relationship, just talking about the class and aspect wheels. They have the same relationship as a Mage of Mind and a Mage of Time. It's the same distance, the same angular distance between the two aspects, and of course, Rogue, Mage, right? Yeah. Not sure where I was going with that, but it seemed worth commenting on. One could say that heart is about belief in oneself, whereas hope is about belief, full stop, or belief in something. Heart tends to romanticize the self and relationships between two souls, this whole sort of soulmates concept. Whereas hope tends to romanticize others to the point of neglecting self, or to romanticize ideals or beliefs, whether that's in a religious or scientific or political or narrative cause. Hope externalizes belief, heart internalizes it. One might put it that way. I don't know, I might come back to that because I'm not super confident about that statement, but I think I'll roll with it. Yeah. Hope is belief instantiated externally. Heart is belief instantiated internally. And that does follow with my aspect matrix, where I refer to heart as a personal aspect and hope as an impersonal one. Cool. And so next up, we have another two same class, different aspects. And you know what? They're time and mind again. Wouldn't you know it? So earlier on, these were two separate questions, but because we discussed the Mage of Time versus the Mage of Mind earlier, and what we have up next is the Heir of Time and the Heir of Mind, which is same two aspects, opposite or complementary class. I will discuss them a little bit together, but for starters, just to maintain proper form, let's start with the Heir of Time, which is another one of the first Classpects I ever analyzed on CommunistVriska.tumblr.edu. The Heir of Time. I actually once thought this was my Classpect. Fun fact, way back before I even started this blog, and I still relate to it quite a bit. The Heir of Time is going to have an absolutely insufferable martyr complex. That's just the first thing I thought of, but no. They're going to. There's a real motif of sacrifice here because time is about endings, death, culmination, finality, climax, and the heir is about becoming, inheriting, taking into oneself and ultimately allowing it to suffuse and overwhelm oneself, to become one with it. And becoming one with death, well, becoming one with the end of the story, right? The heir is the end of the book. They're not the monster at the end of the book. They are just the end. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. They're not necessarily a self-righteous, self-destructive martyr, nor are they necessarily an embodiment of death or anything like that. Those are sort of two bad endings for an Heir of Time. But an Heir of Time at their best is someone who channels causality through themselves. I think an Heir of Time could even be a prodigious musician, or composer who has to find the music, find their medium, find the way they want, find the medium in which they want to perform. The Heir of Time on a personal level is also going to have this internal struggle where that at first they feel somewhat isolated from time, which can mean they see themselves as talentless. They see their story as lacking structure and their life as lacking rhythm. Maybe someone who's not necessarily always running late, but who just doesn't have much of a schedule to begin with, doesn't seem to think they have much agency. They might start out the game thinking, well, I don't have a dog in this fight, right? Like, I stumbled into this on accident. So is it really my problem? Am I really called to this? That can't possibly be true. That might be a sort of train of thought they have, especially once they find out what the game's about. Not only do they have to deal with the world ending, now these computerized, supernatural, semi-sentient beings are talking at them, saying you are to become the god of a new world. This is a life or death matter. That's something the Heir is not going to want to deal with at first, because fundamentally an Heir of Time is not going to see themselves as important at first. Yeah. So, yeah, the center of that. Yeah, but oh well, they are wrong. Yeah. That's the great irony of the Heir of Time, is someone who thinks they want to be laid back, want to be unimportant, or not even necessarily that they want to be unimportant, but just that they aren't. No way, I'm not the hero. What do you mean I have to fight an apocalyptic battle? You got the wrong person here, my friend. But no, they got the right person. And the Heir of Time is going to have to come into their own and inherit the ending, take up the struggle, and ultimately become an embodiment of the struggle, which is why this story has so much potential for tragedy, but also a lot of potential to be a reluctant hero story. They've got to realize that this is their fight before the fight consumes them, before they are forced to sacrifice themselves to reach the conclusion. And one way this could go wrong is if the heir, when finally inheriting their role as the one who is destined to struggle, destined to confront the end head on, if they ultimately interpret that to mean that they have to martyr themselves, that their sacrifice is a necessity for the game's success. Because that's definitely a train of thought that they could go down once they do come to terms with the fact that this is actually their fight. and something that they should probably avoid. Because, you know, martyrdom is noble, but it's also very sad in it. Next up, we have the Error of Mind, which, when I was first getting into classpecting, and I mean when I was like 14, that's the one I diagnosed myself with. These are all anonymous requests, by the way. Like, there's not any particular structure to why I'm doing these ones. I'm just going in reverse order through my backlog and my ask box on tumblr.edu. And so, yeah, the Error of Mind. They are the law. No, but the Error of Mind is going to be someone who considers themselves chaotic but really, really isn't. Someone who presents themselves as kind of immoral and dissolute, but actually is fundamentally a very ethical person and someone whose ethics are necessary to guide the course of the game. And one thing that heirs have in common, as the most passive class, is a sense of unimportance about themselves, not a lack of confidence, not a lack of ambition, just a sort of sense that the situation that they're in is impossible. It's why Egbert is such a great everyman character and such a great entry point into the Homestuck. The Homestuck, yes, into the narrative of Andrew Hussey's Homestuck. Someone who thinks they are amoral because they are very moral and don't know it yet. Yeah, exactly. And again, moral here refers more to legalistic morality than to empathetic morality. It's not morality as in compassion, not to say that they're not compassionate, but the focus is really more on proper conduct, on pragmatic ethics, and on action and consequence. I'm not gonna go so far as to say that every Mind player is a consequentialist, but I bet a lot of them are. And I think Mind does have a connection to consequentialist and utilitarian ethics. But yeah, they're trying to think of a good character example for an Error of Mind. But I can't. I'll get back to you on that. But yeah, once again, we have sort of a potential reluctant hero type, like someone who acts really chill and laid back and is like, I care about my friends and myself. You know, I'm not big on morality or ethics. You know, do what you want, don't hurt anybody, etc. Right? But who actually does have a pretty rigid moral code. They might be, as more of like, I don't know, a negative personality trait. They might be someone who's quite judgmental, but constantly denies that. Like, who's constantly making private judgments of those around them. Like, they see the world as immoral or dissolute or without structure, and maybe they don't say anything about it because who am I to judge? Only, surprise, you're in a game about the end of the world, and you're either going to be a god or lost to oblivion forever. Think fast. And yeah, that is something every player in the game is confronted with. But heirs are most likely to be taken aback. Like, no, that can't be right. A page is going to be bloody scared. A rogue is going to be panicked and anxious. A thief or a prince is probably going to be like, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. And we all know how that works out. well, either that or they're going to be like, yes, this is my destiny. And of course, both of those paths lead to ruin. Both abject defiance and direct entitlement. Yeah, an heir will just be surprised, and the heir of mind is going to be surprised that yes, they are the exact person that has to pass judgment, that has to make important ethical decisions, not just for themselves, but for cosmic forces, for everyone around them. They're going to be a very important decision maker as someone who really has never thought of themselves as such, as someone with the right to make decisions. But in fact, it's been their birthright this whole time. They are the heir. And the fortune they're coming into is not one of wealth or power, but one of wisdom and justice. It's a pretty cool role, if you ask me. It's not mine. But I do admire mind players, even if I don't really understand them as well as I do, say, time or light players, or of course hope players, because I do think I am one. But yeah, mind is adjacent to both hope and space. And the two of us here are a hope player and a space player. So I think we can both get mind players to some extent. To draw some comparisons between the heir of time and the heir of mind, well, just like the mage of time and the mage of mind, heirs and mages both channel their aspect, both experience their aspect more fully than anyone else, mages especially, but also heirs, because in order to become and to inherit one's aspect, one has to have that complete and overwhelming experience of it. Heirs are less likely to suffer from their aspect and also less likely to have direct control or direct ability to exploit their aspect than mages, but what they have in common is the fact that they are direct conduits. They are right up in their aspect's business. How would you become mind? Oh, well, this is something I thought about a lot, again, way back in like 2014 when I was first getting into Classpecting. Like turning into thoughts. Mind players have some level of telepathy and precognizance, but like entering the web of connections between people, becoming one's own word, right? Like transcending the physical form and becoming a thought form, a being of pure clarity. An heir of mind or any mind player might see, because mind is at a trine with blood, it does have a lot to do with connections between people. With mind, it's less about connections of obligation or relation, and more to do with connections of reason, of dialogue, of discussion. And so an heir of mind might enter the sound waves or the internet or whatever means of communication, and might become one with that network of thoughts and words and ideas. I think that sounds pretty cool. And by entering this network, they would no longer just be the one making the decisions, they would be the decisions. They would be the stream of causality. How badass is that? So I've covered, actually, everything on the list that I wanted to cover. But I have 20 minutes left, which means I have time to do two more that I wasn't expecting to. So here's request, you... Yeah. Uh, this is actually a request that you sent, way back. And since we haven't talked about any space players today, I think it would be cool to do that. You asked about the Thief of Space, which reminds me a lot of Andrew Hussey's fake Classpect, The Waste of Space. But no, a Thief of Space is someone who wants to appropriate, master, or command the physical world, the physical sciences, physical arts, distance, gravity. Yeah, the spatial dimension. So a Thief of Space would be great at like the warp drive concept, like folding space, compacting space. You want to get from point A to point B, but you can't travel faster than the speed of light. Just channel all that space into yourself. Not like a Prince of Space who would like blast a hole in the space-time continuum and cause all kinds of problems, but a Thief of Space would just take all that distance. Yeah, might become very tall. Yes. I think a Thief of Space, just because thieves tend to be kind of, to use video game terms, they tend to be like a DPS class, right? And space is a very physical aspect. I think the Thief of Space would be right up there with some of the ones I've mentioned before, like the Prince of Space and the Prince of Time, in terms of someone who is going to be a lethal weapon during combat sequences in the game. The Thief of Space could also, one way to interpret it might be as like a Thomas Edison type, if you know what I mean. Like, they're not a brilliant scientist, but they are brilliant at using and marketing other people's science. And so, you know, they might uh they might acquire some technology from Prospit or Durst or from their planet and ultimately like use it. One turn makes everybody in an area float, on the next turn uses gravity bullets. Yeah, great ideas. Thieves ultimately, similarly to princes and witches, again, because those are all in the commander section, the most active classes, they're all people who wield their aspect to its fullest extent. And when I say wield, I don't mean like a knight or a maid sort of wields and exploits. I mean, beyond even wield, it's assume direct control of. A Thief of Space at the height of their power is going to have complete mastery of the interrelations between physical objects. And that is a lot of power. So yeah. Space, this is somewhat shared with its complement and opposite time because space and time are a continuum. But space can absolutely have an effect over speed, momentum, velocity, those sorts of concepts. So I like the idea of a Thief of Space being confronted with a projectile and just absorbing all of its momentum, and it drops out of the air in front of them. You know, someone's trying to approach them. Well, just like they stole space, now they have a whole lot of it to surround themselves with. A Thief of Space could always become isolated if they wanted to by just drawing on the reserves of space they've stolen and surrounding themselves with emptiness. As a person, a thief of space is going to be like a thief of time, a real loner type, for better or worse, but probably unfortunately for worse. They want to a Classpecting blog I follow recently was having a discussion with somebody about how space gets associated with loneliness often, but that's really more of a domain of breath. And I think that's a salient point. I do agree that it's more that isolation and distancing from one's peers, especially in a social sense, is more of breath's domain. But I do still think physical distance and physical isolation is the domain of space. You know, the vast ether between the stars, that's space's business, not breath's. There's no they want to be as far away from you as far as you want. Yeah. I could see the thief of space as someone who not only thinks they do their best work alone, but thinks everyone around them is kind of accidentally or even intentionally sabotaging them. Yeah. Could be like someone who starts to get a bit paranoid that everyone around them is trying to bring them down. Or that nobody gets what they're doing, so please stay far away so you don't break anything. And the reality is, of course, that the thief of space is just as dependent on everyone else around them as any other Classpect is. One challenge with all three of the most active classes, the thief, the prince, and the witch, is that they think they can handle everything themselves, or they usually think they can handle everything themselves. And that, combined with space's affinity for physical isolation and for attention to technical detail, which is something they share with the semi-sextile aspect of mind and the sextile aspect of doom, is yeah, a thief of space runs the risk of not only becoming physically isolated, but pushing away everyone around them in their pursuit of personal perfectionism. However, on the plus side, they are going to be an excellent specialist. Particularly, I think, when it comes to engineering. The thief of space isn't an inventor, but they could take a sort of harebrained, mad, wild invention and make it into something actually practical, make it work, and then take all the credit for the idea. They could see in what looked like just a bunch of bulky, useless objects the potential for elaborate constructions. Which is something they share with the Mage of Space, by the way. I think both of these classes would be great great engineers or sculptors, someone who takes sort of raw space and takes control of it, commands it. The mage would do this by experiencing it, by experiencing the distance and the structure and the physicality. Not the structure. Space is I misspoke. Time is more about structure than space. Space is often about chaos and incipience. You could say if time is about action, space is about conception or ideation. And we see this, by the way, literally in the metaphor of the Genesis frog, which is a space symbol. It's the conception of the new universe. The thief towards the end game is someone who might especially since they played such a big role in the final battle, might take the creation of the new universe upon themselves. You know, the game is a coming-of-age story, but things aren't perfect once you come of age, right? The Thief of Space will hopefully come into their own and realize that they need to be a leader and not just a micromanager and a controller. But there's always this lingering attitude among both thieves and space players that they're the only ones who are specialized enough to know the right way to handle it. So yeah, and I think we have time for one more before I sign off for the night. I thought I was going to get through my entire backlog. That didn't happen. I think I easily still have enough for 1 to 3 more live streams. So yeah, but we'll do one more before I sign off. Let's see, I've gone through all the ones I wrote out notes on, so alright, the next one is Page of Rage. Do you think a Thief of Space might try to kidnap Bilious Slick? Oh dear, that would be a concerning way for things to go, but yes, absolutely. That's the exact kind of stunt they'd try to pull. Literally, I'm gonna take the Genesis frog. None of you fuckers know how to build a universe. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to go far away and yeah. No, that would be bad news, but that would be a great conflict to have within a fan session of Space who says, yeah, this whole creation business, that's my scene. So you know what? I think I can handle this universe building thing on my own. Yeah. And when the more isolated a space player becomes from their time player, and the more they try to entirely take control of the game, the worse things are going to go. So hopefully there's sufficient collaboration to bring the team back together before anything bad happens to that frog. Because of course, if a space player, this is a risk I hadn't brought up, but it's actually a really important one with the Thief of Space. If a space player, goes dark side, so to speak, it's really risky because you need them to win the game, and if they're not cooperating, you've got a real universe threatening problem on your hands. Yeah. All right. Right, so I was going to do one more, right? Page of Rage. I might go into this one in more detail in a future stream, but for now I'll offer a few comments on it, and then maybe I'll get into it more later. I'm starting to space out a little bit. I love doing these streams, but also, whoa, it's like, I used to, back when I was starting out, I'd write 1 or 2 of these per day, and I'm on number 14. The Page of Rage is someone who starts out committed to ideas that they don't really believe, who wants to be an iconoclast, who a Page of Rage might be terrifying by the end game. Yeah. Oh yeah. In fact, an end game Page of Rage would be like a great another Classpect with great antagonist potential narratively. An endgame Page of Rage could just shatter the fourth wall. an endgame Page of Rage might be the only, and maybe not even, but possibly the only class spec that I'd ever think could damage or stretch the fifth wall. But the fifth wall is a concept I'll probably have to discuss at more length in the future, because I've only seen it used in one context, and it's maybe not. There's probably not one fixed definition of it, but I know the definition I'm talking about. Anyway, the Page of Rage, yeah, they're committed to beliefs or systems of belief that they don't actually have confidence in. They have to pretend to support or look up to people whom they don't actually view in such an idealized light. And ultimately, they want to be an iconoclast. They want to fight back against the system. They don't think they're up to it. And they've got to contend with that. They've got to get angry. Stop pretending to be happy-go-lucky. Stop repressing their issues. Actually fight back. Actually act out. Actually say no, you're wrong. People are constantly telling them what to believe, and they always just play along. But the Page of Rage is going to be challenged to push back against that, to really take a stand and say, no. To quote another song I love, and Save Rock and Roll by Fall Out Boy. In a world full of the word yes, I'm here to say no. That's the role a Page of Rage is called to. They're here to say no. They're not necessarily a nihilist, but they're not an idealist either. They're a critic. That's one of the main words I always associate with Rage players and with Sylphs, is critic. I just realized I have Classpected both Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels on here. The Vrisk communist duo is complete. Karl Marx is a Sylph of Rage. Friedrich Engels is a Seer of Life. Page of Rage. Yeah, again, I want to talk about this in more detail later because I'm getting a little burnt out. But potentially a tremendously powerful role, as we've already seen the extent of the power of a Page of Hope at the height of their abilities. The real challenge is, like a Page of Hope, a Page of Rage has this issue of not being willing to say no, of being a bit of a pushover, and that's the main obstacle they're going to need to get past in order to fully realize their identity and fully realize their role in the world to come. And with that, I think I'm about to sign off. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you watched any part of this live, thank you, Zhao, for your insightful comments. It's been really great having you on board for these past two streams, because you often point out things I've overlooked. And if you're watching the VOD of this on YouTube, again, thanks for watching. This is Cas CommunistVriska signing off for the evening. Peace, love, unity, respect, and I hope to see you soon, because boy howdy do I have a lot more of these to get through.